The human mind is one of the most powerful creations in existence. It can imagine worlds that do not yet exist, solve impossible problems, create art, build civilizations, discover scientific truths, and transform ordinary lives into extraordinary journeys. Yet the same mind that has the ability to become your greatest strength can also become your biggest enemy. Many people today are not defeated by external enemies, poverty, lack of opportunity, or difficult circumstances. They are defeated by their own thoughts. Their mind constantly creates fear, anxiety, self-doubt, overthinking, insecurity, comparison, negativity, confusion, emotional suffering, and inner conflict. The tragedy is that most people do not even realize that the battlefield of their life exists inside their own head. They think the problem is outside them, but often the real problem is the uncontrolled mind that continuously distorts reality, drains energy, and destroys peace. Your mind becomes your enemy when you stop being its master and become its prisoner. Instead of using the mind as a tool, you begin living under its control. Thoughts begin controlling emotions, emotions begin controlling actions, and actions begin shaping a painful life. The mind itself is not evil. It is simply a powerful instrument. But when left undisciplined, unconscious, and uncontrolled, it starts creating suffering automatically. Most human beings live almost entirely through mental conditioning. From childhood, the brain absorbs beliefs, fears, opinions, insecurities, social expectations, comparisons, and emotional patterns from parents, school, society, media, religion, culture, and personal experiences. Slowly, a psychological identity is formed. This identity becomes the voice inside the head. That voice constantly comments on everything. It judges, compares, criticizes, worries, remembers painful memories, imagines negative futures, and creates endless mental noise. Over time, people begin believing that this voice is who they truly are. But in reality, you are not every thought that appears in your mind. Thoughts are mental events, not absolute truths. The problem begins when people unconsciously believe every thought without questioning it. A single negative thought can ruin an entire day because the mind keeps repeating and strengthening it. Suppose someone ignores your message. The mind instantly creates stories. Maybe they hate me. Maybe I am not important. Maybe I did something wrong. Within minutes, anxiety appears, even though reality may be completely different. The mind has an extraordinary ability to create suffering from imagination alone. This is one reason why your mind becomes your enemy. It continuously generates psychological problems that may not even exist in reality. The human brain evolved primarily for survival, not happiness. Ancient humans survived because their brains constantly scanned for danger. Those who ignored threats often died. As a result, the modern mind is naturally biased toward negativity, fear, and problem detection. Even when there is no immediate danger, the brain continues searching for problems. This survival mechanism was useful in dangerous environments, but in modern life it often becomes destructive. Your mind constantly anticipates worst-case scenarios. It overthinks conversations, worries about the future, fears rejection, compares itself with others, and creates stress over situations that may never happen. This is why many people suffer more in imagination than in reality. The mind becomes an enemy when fear dominates awareness. Fear is one of the strongest psychological forces controlling human life. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of loneliness, fear of losing status, fear of not being enough, fear of death, fear of uncertainty. These fears silently shape decisions, relationships, careers, and identities. The mind constantly tries to protect you from emotional pain, but ironically, this protection often creates a smaller and more fearful life. People avoid opportunities because they fear failure. They avoid expressing emotions because they fear rejection. They avoid change because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Slowly, the mind builds invisible prisons. A person may appear physically free while mentally trapped. This mental prison is one of the greatest forms of suffering because it limits potential without visible chains. Another reason the mind becomes an enemy is overthinking. Overthinking is the inability to stop repetitive mental analysis. The mind keeps replaying the past or predicting the future. It analyzes conversations repeatedly, imagines endless possibilities, and creates emotional exhaustion. Overthinking gives the illusion of control, but in reality it weakens clarity and peace. Most answers in life become visible through calm awareness, not endless mental noise. Yet modern society glorifies constant thinking. People are taught to stay mentally busy all the time. Silence feels uncomfortable because people are addicted to stimulation. Phones, social media, entertainment, notifications, and constant information overload keep the mind hyperactive. A hyperactive mind loses the ability to remain peaceful. Many people today cannot sit quietly for even a few minutes without feeling restless because the mind has become addicted to distraction. This addiction weakens emotional stability and inner awareness. Comparison is another major reason the mind becomes destructive. Social media has amplified this problem dramatically. People constantly compare their appearance, success, relationships, money, lifestyle, popularity, and achievements with others. The mind always focuses on what is missing rather than what already exists. Even successful people suffer because the mind keeps shifting standards upward. Someone earning a modest income dreams of wealth. When they become wealthy, the mind compares them with richer people. Satisfaction disappears because comparison never ends. The mind creates the illusion that happiness exists somewhere else in another body, another relationship, another achievement, another future. As long as the mind constantly seeks fulfillment externally, peace remains distant. The mind also becomes an enemy through negative self-talk. Many people speak to themselves more harshly than they would ever speak to another human being. Inside their minds, there is constant criticism. I am not good enough. I always fail. Nobody truly cares about me. I am unattractive. I am weak. I will never succeed. Repeated thoughts gradually shape identity. The brain begins accepting these thoughts as truth. This weakens confidence, motivation, emotional health, and self-worth. Over time, the person becomes psychologically conditioned to expect failure or rejection. The danger of negative self-talk is that it becomes invisible through repetition. People no longer realize how deeply toxic their inner dialogue has become. The mind constantly attacks them from within, destroying peace silently. One of the most dangerous things about the mind is its attachment to the past. Human beings carry emotional wounds, regrets, humiliations, betrayals, failures, heartbreaks, and painful memories for years or even decades. The mind repeatedly replays these experiences, keeping old pain alive. A painful event may last only a few moments in reality, but the mind can recreate that suffering thousands of times through memory. This is why many people are physically living in the present but psychologically trapped in the past. Their mind keeps reminding them of what they lost, what went wrong, who hurt them, or what they should have done differently. The inability to let go creates continuous suffering. Similarly, the mind becomes obsessed with the future. Anxiety is often the mind attempting to control uncertainty. Since the future cannot be fully predicted, the mind continuously imagines possible dangers. What if I fail? What if something goes wrong? What if people judge me? What if I lose everything? This endless anticipation creates stress hormones in the body, weakening mental and physical health. Ironically, most feared scenarios never happen, yet the suffering caused by imagining them becomes real. Your mind can make you experience pain for events that do not even exist. This shows how powerful and dangerous uncontrolled thinking can become. Another way the mind turns against you is through attachment to identity. People become deeply attached to labels, roles, opinions, beliefs, social status, religion, appearance, and personal image. The mind creates a psychological identity and then constantly tries to defend it. Any criticism feels like a personal attack. Any disagreement creates emotional pain. This attachment creates insecurity because identities are fragile and temporary. When life changes, the mind struggles because it fears losing the image it created. A person who builds identity entirely around beauty suffers when aging begins. A person attached to status suffers when success declines. A person attached to others' approval suffers whenever criticism appears. The mind creates false identities and then suffers trying to protect them. Ego plays a major role in this process. The ego is the psychological image you carry about yourself. It constantly wants validation, superiority, attention, control, and recognition. When the ego is threatened, emotional reactions intensify. Anger, jealousy, resentment, and insecurity often emerge because the ego feels wounded. The mind constantly compares itself with others to strengthen identity. This creates endless conflict because someone will always appear more successful, attractive, intelligent, or powerful. The ego can never be fully satisfied because it depends on external validation. This dependence makes peace impossible. The mind also becomes an enemy through emotional addiction. Many people become addicted to emotional patterns without realizing it. Some become addicted to drama, anger, victimhood, sadness, toxic relationships, or self-pity. Because these emotions become psychologically familiar, the brain develops neural pathways based on repetition. If someone spends years living in negativity, the mind starts returning automatically to negative thinking patterns. Even when life improves, the mind may still search for problems because suffering became psychologically familiar. This is why healing requires conscious effort. Without awareness, the mind repeats old patterns endlessly. Modern life has intensified mental suffering because human attention is constantly under attack. Technology companies compete aggressively for attention because attention generates profit. Endless scrolling, short videos, notifications, sensational news, online comparison, and digital addiction keep the mind overstimulated. The brain rarely gets true rest. People wake up and immediately consume information. Their mind never becomes still. Continuous stimulation weakens concentration, patience, emotional regulation, and inner clarity. The mind becomes fragmented and restless. Many people cannot focus deeply anymore because their attention span has been damaged by constant digital distraction. A distracted mind becomes weaker and easier to control. This is one reason why so many people feel mentally exhausted despite doing little physical work. Mental overload drains energy. The mind also becomes an enemy when people seek happiness entirely outside themselves. Society teaches people that happiness depends on achievements, money, relationships, appearance, fame, or social approval. While these things can bring temporary pleasure, they cannot create permanent inner peace. The mind always adapts and wants more. This phenomenon is called hedonic adaptation. After achieving something desired, happiness briefly rises and then returns to previous levels. The mind then searches for another target. This endless chasing creates chronic dissatisfaction. People spend their entire lives pursuing external success while remaining internally empty. The problem is not success itself, but the belief that external achievements alone can create lasting fulfillment. Another dangerous aspect of the mind is cognitive distortion. The mind often interprets reality inaccurately. It exaggerates problems, assumes negative intentions, generalizes failures, and ignores positive experiences. For example, if someone fails once, the mind may conclude, "I always fail." If one person rejects them, the mind may think, "Nobody will ever love me." These distortions feel real emotionally even when logically false. The mind can trap people inside false narratives for years. Depression and anxiety often involve distorted thinking patterns that repeatedly reinforce suffering. The mind creates stories and then emotionally reacts to its own stories. This cycle becomes extremely painful. One of the deepest reasons the mind becomes an enemy is lack of awareness. Most people are never taught how the mind works. Schools teach mathematics, history, science, and language, but very few teach emotional intelligence, self-awareness, thought observation, or mental discipline. As a result, people grow up completely identified with their thoughts. They believe every emotion and mental story automatically. They never learn to observe the mind objectively. Awareness changes everything because the moment you observe the mind consciously, separation begins. You realize thoughts come and go like clouds. You are the awareness observing them, not the thoughts themselves. This realization weakens mental control. Meditation and mindfulness practices exist precisely for this reason. They train the mind to become still and conscious. A still mind becomes clearer, wiser, and less destructive. Many people misunderstand mental discipline. They think controlling the mind means suppressing emotions or forcing positivity. But suppression often creates deeper psychological problems. Healthy awareness means understanding thoughts without becoming enslaved by them. Negative thoughts may still appear, but you no longer automatically obey them. Emotional maturity means developing the ability to pause before reacting impulsively. The uncontrolled mind reacts immediately. A conscious mind responds wisely. Anger is another powerful example of how the mind becomes destructive. Anger itself is natural, but when uncontrolled, it destroys relationships, opportunities, peace, and judgment. The mind often creates anger by interpreting situations personally and defensively. Ego feels threatened, and emotional reaction follows. In moments of anger, people say and do things they later regret deeply. Temporary emotions create permanent consequences. An uncontrolled mind behaves like fire. It spreads destruction quickly. Jealousy also emerges from mental insecurity. The mind compares, fears loss, and seeks validation. Instead of appreciating life, jealousy creates bitterness toward others' success or happiness. This poisons inner peace. Similarly, resentment keeps people emotionally chained to past pain. The mind repeatedly replays injustice and betrayal, preventing healing. Forgiveness does not mean approving harmful actions. It means refusing to let past pain control your present life. Another reason the mind becomes an enemy is the illusion of certainty. The mind desperately wants control and predictability, but life is inherently uncertain. Relationships change, people leave, plans fail, bodies age, and circumstances transform unexpectedly. The more the mind demands certainty, the more anxious it becomes. Wise people accept uncertainty as part of life. This acceptance creates flexibility and peace. The rigid mind suffers because reality rarely follows exact expectations. Spiritual traditions across history have emphasized mastering the mind because inner suffering originates largely from unconscious thinking. Whether through meditation, prayer, self-inquiry, mindfulness, or contemplation, the central teaching remains similar. Freedom begins when awareness becomes stronger than compulsive thought. A peaceful mind does not mean absence of challenges. It means the ability to remain internally balanced despite challenges. The strongest people are not those who never experience negative thoughts. They are those who do not become controlled by them. Healing the mind requires consistent practice. First, awareness is necessary. You must begin observing your thoughts honestly. Notice repetitive negativity, fear patterns, comparison habits, emotional triggers, and self-destructive beliefs. Second, reduce mental overstimulation. Spending less time consuming endless digital content helps restore clarity. Silence and solitude are powerful because they allow the mind to slow down. Third, strengthen the body through proper sleep, exercise, nutrition, and breathing practices because physical health strongly affects mental health. Fourth, practice mindfulness or meditation regularly. Even a few minutes daily can gradually weaken mental chaos. Fifth, question negative thoughts instead of automatically believing them. Ask yourself whether a thought is truly factual or simply fear-based imagination. Sixth, develop purpose and meaningful action. An idle mind often becomes trapped in overthinking and negativity. Action creates momentum and confidence. Seventh, practice gratitude. The mind naturally focuses on problems, so consciously appreciating what already exists balances perception. Eighth, surround yourself with healthy influences because the environment shapes mental patterns significantly. Most importantly, learn to separate your identity from your thoughts. You are not every fear, emotion, memory, or mental story. Thoughts arise and disappear continuously. Awareness remains. The mind becomes dangerous when you completely identify with its activity. Freedom begins when you recognize that you can observe thoughts without becoming trapped inside them. A disciplined mind becomes a powerful servant. An undisciplined mind becomes a cruel master. The same mind that creates suffering can also create wisdom, creativity, peace, love, focus, and transformation when trained consciously. Ultimately, your mind becomes your enemy not because it was designed to destroy you, but because it was never taught how to function consciously. Left uncontrolled, it follows survival instincts, emotional conditioning, fear patterns, and unconscious habits. But through awareness, discipline, self-understanding, and inner work, the mind can transform from an enemy into one of the greatest allies in human life. The battle is not outside you. The real battle is between unconsciousness and awareness within your own mind.